Ever since the character of Glitchtrap was introduced 6 years ago in Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted, the FNaF community still have no solid idea on what he is and where he came from. Whether it's Afton back from the dead or a mimic program that's replicating him, theorists still can't reach a solid conclusion on his identity, and the debate still rages on years later. But after the release of Secret of the Mimic, I think I finally found out the true identity of Glitchtrap, and it's actually more simpler than you realize. Before I move any further, don't forget to like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Like I mentioned, Glitchtrap was first introduced in FNaF Help Wanted. This game tells us that Fazbear Entertainment sent the developers of Help Wanted vintage control boards that can be scanned into the game to help with pathfinding. One of these circuit boards would create an anomaly that would take the form of William Afton's alter ego, the Yellow Rabbit. At the end of the game, when we collect all the tapes, the anomaly will try to completely take over the player's mind. But if we listen to the tapes and try to stop Glitchtrap, we see that the player is trapped behind a locked door, and Glitchtrap fades away into the darkness. We would see Glitchtrap again in Security Breach, in the Princess Quest arcade cabinet, and in the real world as Burntrap. Then in Help Wanted 2, when we collect all the figures, we see Glitchtrap come out of a charging pod, and the Nightmare boss kill the player. In an alternate ending, we play the final Princess Quest game, and Vanessa finally kills Glitchtrap. So that's the main bulk of Glitchtrap's story. Now that we know the story, we now have to figure out who he is. To get us closer on knowing the identity of Glitchtrap, I have to establish one key thing. Glitchtrap is heavily connected with a mimic program. Whether you think Afton is in there or his agony or whatever, Glitchtrap is at least made from a mimic program. Because first, the vintage circuit boards from Help Wanted were also scanned into the game because they can digitally recreate performances and personalities from the past in an instant. So these circuit boards can recreate personalities, which is already the second clue that Glitchtrap is part mimic. The first clue is of course instead of copying Afton's regular spring Bonnie suit, the anomaly looks more like a mascot suit, which the mimic frequently uses. We also hear the anomaly copy Tape Girl's voice whenever he appears.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Glitchtrap uses Helpy to trick the protagonists. And we know they are connected because if we kill Glitchtrap in Princess Quest 4 before getting the regular ending, Helpy vanishes from the screen. This is important to point out because Helpy can have orange eyes similar to the mimic, and can take voice samples from anyone and apply it into a camera terminal. When we also do the Fast Force ending, we help Glitchtrap achieve his goals, which is using us to give Cassie the AR mask to free the mimic. And lastly, we see that one of Glitchtrap's memories are of David's tiger plush, which undeniably connects Glitchtrap to the mimic. So it's obvious that the mimic has something to do with the creation of Glitchtrap. But the most important question right now is, which mimic is it? Because if you somehow didn't know, the secret of the mimic was that there was two of them. M1, the original mimic program that was made to mimic Fiona and take care of David, and M2, the program that was supposed to be a replacement of David, but when Edwin beat the Endo, M2 copied that behavior and became a murderous Endo that mimicked Edwin's rage. Now, from that description alone, it's pretty obvious that M2 is the program that made Glitchtrap. I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? M2 is a homicidal robot that kills anyone it sees, which isn't in M1's nature. She just wants David back and keep people safe. M1 is the sun, the life, while M2 is the moon, the destruction. It just doesn't make sense for sun to become a homicidal anomaly that takes over people's minds and kills children for just shits and giggles. All of this doesn't even achieve M1's main goal of bringing back David. Also, in the bad ending of Secret of the Mimic, M2 stuffs us into Prototype Freddy and watches us perform, similar to how Glitchtrap in Help Wanted stuffs us into Freddy and was dancing to the show. Like what Steelwold told us in the Darko interview, this game has a lot of things that rhyme with the past games, and having M2 stuff people into suits and also be present in a recreation of Help Wanted's pizza party ending shows us that these two are definitely connected. M2 also wears an amalgamation of different Freddy parts during the R&D section. This design sort of matches with the fast Botatron from Help Wanted 2, which is connected to Glitchtrap. M2 in Ruin also mimics a lot of what Gregory says in Security Breach, which would be impossible if he wasn't at least tapped into the Pizzaplex's systems like Glitchtrap was. And like I said, M2 and Glitchtrap use Helpy to achieve their plans. Helpy himself represents M2 in a way. Notice how Helpy has the color scheme of both Mr. and Mrs. Helpful. Helpy in a way is their son, and since Mr. Helpful is Edwin and Mrs. Helpful is Fiona, then Helpy would be David, or you could say his replacement, M2. And lastly, in Help Wanted 2, to unlock Mimic in the gallery, Glitchtrap gives us David's tiger plush, the same one M2 probably owned before Edwin beat it. So I think it's pretty obvious that M2 is involved with Glitchtrap's creation, rather than being M1 like some people believe. But is that it? Is Glitchtrap purely M2's code? Because there are theories out there that M2 and Afton, or at least his agony, are combined to form Glitchtrap. But is that the case? Well, I don't think so. I think Secret of the Mimic gave us enough info to conclude that Glitchtrap is purely M2. To better understand what I mean, let's just go back to Secret of the Mimic, because it actually gave us a lot of insight on how Mimic really operates. In my last video, I covered how Mimic by itself can't simply lock into a personality. For example, M1 only became a copy of Fiona and stayed that way because Edwin fed the program with a lot of Fiona's memories and was able to perfectly mimic her, to the point that it thinks it's the real Fiona. But despite that, it wasn't a perfect copy of her, not only because she was aware that she was a machine, not flesh and blood, but also because M1 didn't mimic Fiona's talent and her craftsmanship, and how she would criticize Edwin when he was being neglectful. M1 only acted like a mother to David and as Edwin's wife. So even when M1 was locked into the Fiona personality, it only mimicked what Edwin thought of his wife rather than the real Fiona. That explains why M2 was never able to be a perfect copy of David. M2 mimicked David's actions and voice, yes, but he was never thinking and acting like he was the real David. That's because Edwin never spent a lot of time with the son to really know him, and so M2 never had enough information to help him be like the real David. But M1 did know David. She took care of him the most when Edwin wasn't around, and so she knew what David liked, what he disliked, and what made him as an individual. M1 really knew David. That's why in Moon.exe, the way to beat the game and get the glitched permission, you have to collect M1's presents that contained items that was once owned by David. And so putting those items into the game and explaining how it relates to David will help the M2 program lock into the David persona. The way we see M2 in the game is basically a mishmash of everything it saw around it. He isn't locked into one personality. It mimics everything it sees. So that's why I think Glitchtrap is simply M2's code, because M2 would be able to keep the Afton shtick for years if he was locked into that personality, similar to M1, by learning important memories or items associated with Afton, which finally explains the memory dolls in Help Wanted 2. These memory dolls are what make up Glitchtrap. They, like David's toys, would be flooded into the M2 program and help it lock into the Afton persona. But like M1, it doesn't make him act like the real Afton. Glitchtrap is based on how other people saw William Afton, the manipulative murderer who wore a yellow rabbit costume, which is backed up by the memory dolls being of Afton's victims. M2 is only mimicking Afton's worst traits. It's mimicking William like if he didn't have a filter, like he didn't need to keep up a facade. It's mimicking the monster, not the man, similar to the yellow thing in Into the Pit. Then when we free those memories and help Monty 2, we weaken and effectively kill the Glitchtrap persona, and the program goes back to being M2 again, a blank canvas with no real identity. But now we have to ask, where did those memory dolls come from? Well, considering that Moon.exe could hold David's memories, then you could look at the VR game as the equivalent to Moon.exe. Help Wanted is all about Afton's crimes, his victims, and the bloody history of Fazbear's. All the agony and misery that Afton caused is reflected in this game, and so the M2 program would be able to study Afton's crimes, and seeing how similar they are in a way, the program doesn't just copy him, it essentially becomes him. Like M1, the M2 program truly thinks that it's the real resurrected William Afton. And that's how we got Burntrap. In a way, Burntrap is a resurrected William Afton. So now that we dealt with the digital M2, let's look at the actual Endo, and why Burntrap is most definitely the Mimic Endo. Now obviously the Mimic as a concept was made to be able to fit into any costume and become any character. That's why when M2 wears a costume or a character, he essentially becomes the character. So him wearing a yellow rabbit costume with a corpse inside would certainly help it play the role of a resurrected Afton. And thanks to the memory dolls, Burntrap in his boss fight is acting like how William would act at that moment, trying to control the animatronics to do his bidding. There's also the fact that in Ruin, when we arrive at the basement, Burntrap's room, which was previously filled with purple lighting, is now orange. The only purple lighting that we see is near the vent, which has Burntrap's claw mark. We know it's Burntrap's claw mark because the doll marks line up exactly with Burntrap's bone fingers. Then when we arrive in Mimic's room, we see two of the same hand marks in the collapsed vent, the same vent that leads to M2. In addition, when we see M2, we can faintly see purple lighting around him, as if he was the one that made Burntrap's lair in Security Breach purple in the first place, and after it left, the rooms turned orange, with some remnants of purple lighting still present as if it had left a trail. This purple lighting on M2 would even stay consistent with Secret of the Mimic, where when M2 recreates Pizza Party, a purple light is deliberately facing towards M2. This is simply not coincidence. Steelwool are aware of color theory and using color to tell a story, so they deliberately put purple lighting on M2 twice to show us his connection to Burntrap. But I know a lot of people will argue that if Burntrap is M2, then why do they look so different? Well, that's easy. It's because Burntrap was never supposed to be a real physical character to begin with. He was supposed to be this ghostly character that you can barely see in the corner or between machinery. He wasn't supposed to be a physical mimic. Furthermore, Steelwool probably didn't know what the mimic was in the first place, since Scott never told them the story. So Burntrap becoming the mimic is most likely Scott and Steelwool just course correcting the story. Instead of resurrecting Afton for real, they had the mimic take that role. Burntrap's Endo design is also a mishmash of reused assets. If M2 just looked like Burntrap's Endo, then this would have been a shit design for what's supposed to be the next big bad. However, one design similarities between M2 and Burntrap that is important to point out is the hand. A hand that, mind you, is a unique model that isn't a reused asset. But that's not all. The hand that left the claw marks are of the right hand. Since the marks left has 5 fingers instead of 4, then this 4-fingered hand wasn't originally part of M2 and was broken off when the vent collapsed, which is supported by M2's design because if you look at the socket where the rest of the arm is attached, you'll see that it's broken. So, Burntrap's right claw hand belonged to M2. So Burntrap is the same endo as the Mimic. We even see in the Tales epilogues that when the Mimic arrived at the pizza place, he had rabbit ears. And we would see the Mimic having rabbit ears again when he's chasing us in R&D. You know, the Freddy's recreation. And let's be honest with ourselves here. Some of the shit that M2 does in Secret of the Mimic is more egregious than him being Burntrap. Like when he wears Jackie, he can make his legs disappear and stretch his arms so far to a ridiculous degree. He essentially wears Dolly's endoskeleton since it's still present when M2 escapes it, and M2 literally turns big enough to wear Big Top. And yes, he is wearing Big Top because Steelwool posted this art of Big Top where we can see M2's spiral eyes. So yes, M2 is wearing Big Top. Even Edwin's other inventions just ignore the laws of physics, since the Cleanovac can just increase or decrease its size, and the coat rack can expand to 10 feet. Even in Tales, the Mimic can just turn into a spider robot. But apparently, him wearing a burnt corpse is what's impossible to believe. But that's just my thoughts. I would love to hear your opinions down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, all that jazz, and I'll see you on the flip side.